Hi, my name is Kimberly Wong. I'm a fifth generation Chinese Canadian femme who works and organizes in Chinatown. I work with an organization called Hua Foundation as the Race and Equity Project Manager. Today, I've invited my friend Halsalem to go on a little walk with me.
Hi, my name is Halsalem. I'm a 385th generation Squamish. I'm also queer and an elected community leader with the Squamish Nation. I'm very proud to be from Vancouver, and I'm also an educator in Indigenous languages.
Hey friend!
Hi!
So
Good
nice
to see you.
you.
Good to see you.
How you doing?
I'm doing really well. It's been a while.
Yeah,
You want to go for a walk today?
I'd love to.
Awesome. Where do you want to go?
Chinatown?
Okay, let's go.
Cool. Mind if we drop by the memorial today?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Just like to go right there.
I've been living in Strathcona for almost 2 years now.
Wow.
And I really enjoy it. I really like this part of Vancouver.
Yeah. I guess we moved around the same time, eh?
Yeah. And it's interesting to me, like, the history of all the different communities who have lived here, since its founding, and some of the working class backgrounds of the neighborhood, originally.
Yeah.
And it connects to, I think, like nearby, up until like around the 1910s, there was a Squamish community living just by the Hastings sawmill. That would have been like really close to here. But they all got moved out when the railroad was built. They all relocated back to the North Shore.
I was just going to say that a lot of the houses that are just up here, the Victorian houses, were lodging houses for Chinese Canadian men working on the railway.
Right.
And those histories are wrapped up in each other and contested and
Right.
displaced a lot of people.
Well, one of the things I think about too with Strathcona is like, when I've come through, different historical tours and they talk about the different communities that have lived here, like the Chinese community and the Black community and the Jewish community, and a lot of that history and the movement and displacement that happened over the decades following, the context is also like around the Indigenous people that were living nearby. But then through the 1910s, 20s, 30s, and 40s, were forced to live on the reserves and couldn't live anywhere off, or otherwise they'd have to give up, rights to be part of their Indigenous community. And so there's, a particular type of apartheid that existed for the Indigenous people at the time, while all this other displacement and discrimination and racism was happening with these other communities.
Whenever I'm in the area, I think about how, like, that was once an undesirable space. It was a marsh.
Right.
If you were coming up from, like, down the hill from Beatty Street down, you would have seen, your feet get wet. You would have heard the squish, squish.
Right.
It was a place that people of color were placed.
Yeah.
Because it was nearby industry, it was polluted, it was, like I said, marshy. So knowing that history of Squamish folks in the community that lived here is layers upon layers.
Yeah.
This Chinese school, it's one of the only ones that still speaks Hoisanwa,
Oh,
which
really?
is like the language that most folks in Chinatown, when they first settled in the late 19th century, spoke.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And like, what is a Chinese school?
So, they teach different dialects of the Chinese language, largely to children.
Oh, yeah.
Like, most Chinese Canadian folks have vivid memories
Right.
of having to write numbers and different poems in their Chinese schools, being there every single day after school or on the weekends.
Okay.
But the ones in Chinatown they teach Cantonese or Hoisanwa,
Yeah.
but those are like village dialects. That's how the majority of folks found each other in Chinatown. They
Right.
came from villages in southern China that spoke similar dialects from the same region,
Right.
and they were able to communicate that way. Like,
Right.
language was trust.
Well, there's so much in language too around like social cohesion and, the ability to feel connected and to be with, people that you want to be like connected to and have something in common and all that kind of stuff.
Which is why when you speak about like, you know, the Squamish language, teaching all those kids and having like conversation circles, it blows my mind, because that's something that I've sought out for my dialect for a long time, because really the only folks who speak it fluently still are mostly elders.
Right.
And it was partially because the Chinese government has phased it out of education. You know, it's a rural language.
Right.
It's something that really only folks who are in Chinatowns around like North America and Australia speak.
Right.
Yeah, it's what my grandma calls a hillbilly language.
Right. Well, and we have that thing too in our community where like with Indigenous language revitalization work, like we're learning from our elders, and then sometimes it's really funny because we have like people learning to speak, but their accent kind of they're like almost imitating how an elder would speak. Like, young people didn't speak like that necessarily, because they're only people we can learn from our elders, and we're trying our best. So it's just, you know, I think about, we have all these recordings of our elders speaking the language, but then, you know, you find a recording, you rarely find a recording of them speaking it when they're younger, and how different it was, because they were just, the way they use language, their accent, you know, elders in any language will speak slightly different than how young people speak. When it comes to language, it's, in my experience, it's really the young people, because young people are interacting with the world for the first time, and they're interacting with so many new things as the world changes and develops, that they're the ones that are trying to make sense of the things in the world. And so there's a lot of new terms that come out from the younger people. You know, for elders, they've lived, say, a really long life, and they've lived in a society where things have changed around them, whereas young people are kind of changing things as well. And so, like with my language, we can kind of pinpoint the like time where new words stopped being added. There was a period where we were adopting a lot of like kind of French pronunciation and English kind of loan words. So we get things like lapat and latam and capot, which are all like French loan words, and we use them in Squamish. We have words like, our word for money is tala, which is a play on the word dollar. And a lot of those were like added, you know, during a time period where people were becoming English speakers. But then when the residential schools really started to ban the language and target it, you have a cutoff where there's like no more young people learning the language as their first language. And then then from that point on, for like 70 years, there's a gap where there's no, you know, 7-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 15-year-olds fluent in the language and then interacting with the world. And so now that we're actually starting to create a younger generation of adult speakers, we're running into situations where we don't have words for it right now, so we have to come up with things. I mean, things as simple as like, when I was teaching in my class, one of the common questions that always came up was like, does anybody have a phone charger? Because everybody always forgot their phone charger. And so like, we started coming up, they just started coming up with words, because it was like, you didn't want to be speaking in the language and then have to like throw in an English word every so often. So there's like things like that I think are coming up now, because there's more and more young people like interacting with the world.
Our experiences might be a little bit different,
right,
working with our elders in our community, but in the Chinatown community at least, there is that hesitation still, like, can I trust this youngin? Can I trust this person? Because they still treat us like children, because they've seen us grow up in the clan associations, they've seen us and our parents, you know, move from house to house. We're still their grandchildren to them. So there isn't that kind of transfer of knowledge or power in the same way. And that's I think a problem. I'll say them. Meet my ancestors. The two figures here represent both World War II veterans who were Chinese Canadian and didn't have the right to vote at that point, and also Canadian Pacific Railway workers. I feel like a lot of queer Asians, particularly Chinese folks, find this space significant because it's kind of one of the only access points to our ancestry that we have. Chinatown's super queer.
Right.
And this is one of the only places in Chinatown that specifically references that history. When I come here, I think a lot about, remember about a year ago, you and I were talking on Instagram and I was in Singapore. And I was having this freak out. I locked myself in a washroom and was like, I'm gonna meet my ancestors today, because I was going to go to the graves. And I was like, what should I write? I was like in tears, I was having panic attacks. And you said something so beautiful and so wise to me. You were like, Kimberly, can you imagine meeting your great-great-great-grandchildren? Can you imagine how incredibly proud you would be just to have them be there? And it just it brought such a clarity and such a calm to that moment of distress.
Wow. I had forgotten about that until now. Yeah. So, I'm imagining you've been here a few times.
I grew up in this area.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. We're basically where the former reserve lands were. Because it used to extend all the way down to the Maritime Museum, and then went across all the way across Vanier Park to the other side of Broad Street Bridge, and then back up towards Chestnut and all of that. But the reserves got over a couple of decades kept getting taken away until there was only about 11 acres left. But there used to be a whole bunch of houses all around here, spaced out all around, and there was about 11 families living there. And then in 1913 is when they all got relocated by the federal and provincial governments. But what was actually interesting is that it was the Vancouver Parks Board and the City of Vancouver Council that initiated the process to ask the province, to ask the feds to start taking the land, because they wanted to, part of it was that there was an assumption that this would become a city and be developed eventually. So a lot of the families were removed because they wanted to push a lot of the Indigenous people that were living here at the time out of the city to make way for the development of the city. Some of my great-great-grandparents had a house here back in the 1800s, late 1800s. There was a bunch of longhouses here as well, and modern kind of wartime homes. There was orchards and some cattle and different farm animals and stuff. Up until maybe 20 years ago, we had elders still alive that remembered that, or they were really young when it happened, right? Because we had an elder pass away recently who was over 100, and they were around in the 1910s. So this is technically called the Kitsilano Indian Reserve, and it's the last piece of the reserve land that existed. There used to be about 60 acres, and it kind of got whittled down to about 11.7. And the bridge is technically in trespass. The land underneath the bridge is not in the jurisdiction of the city. But it's the last little piece of land that we have left for the Squamish Nation. But a lot of people come down here and don't realize that it's reserve or any of that kind of stuff around it.
I've literally come down here and had bubble tea and forgotten where I was.
Right. We got the land back after a lengthy court battle with the government, and through a court settlement had the land returned to the nation, as well as a cash settlement that's been set aside as a trust fund for the community. But it's always been seen as a piece of land that we would use to rebuild a community here, but also as a way to create some wealth to invest back into the community. So a way to generate some financial resources long-term to support things like housing and healthcare, elder care, all the different programs and services that we need in the community. And it's exciting because we're now moving forward towards doing like some large-scale real estate development, but in a way that is like community-owned and community benefited. You know, we're acting like a government in the sense of we own the land and we're going to develop the land, and the profits from that are going to go back into the community.
Yeah.
It's not like a typical developer situation where it's just a privately owned company and, you know, profits are retained privately and all that kind of stuff. So
Who's gonna live here?
there's going to be about 200 to 300 homes set aside for like Squamish people. And I think lots of young people are interested in like moving here, and there'll be a community of Squamish people living here again. But it's also going to be like largely apartment rentals for anybody that in Vancouver that is looking for an apartment close to downtown, and include like a bunch of amenities and commercial spaces for like restaurants and like grocery stores and things like that. But it's one of the biggest developments in Vancouver that's happening, and it largely can happen because it's not happening on city property or city jurisdiction. It's happening in Squamish Nation jurisdiction, and so we're able to do a lot of cool things that otherwise couldn't happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and there's going to be like buildings right here and like over there and like on the other side of the bridge, and I think that's the biggest one's going to be like right here, which will be like 56 stories high. Altogether there'll be like 11 buildings, but then the ground level is going to be like park space, including underneath the bridge, with like different types of recreational spaces and cultural spaces and commercial spaces on the edges for like grocery stores and shops and things like that. So it's exciting because it's, I think, going to be like a type of development that Vancouver's never seen, but it's also being led by one of the local Indigenous communities. So it's exciting that way.
Speak about Indigenous futurity.
Yeah, no, it's going to be interesting.
I love it. Thank you for showing me.
Well, thanks for coming for a walk with me today.
Yeah, thanks for asking.
It's always nice to hang out with you.
Yeah. What are you doing later tonight?
I think I'm gonna go check out Club Quarantine on Zoom.
Ooh. It's funny, that's how we met.
That is how we met.
Just another queer dance club.
Yep, all of them. I go to all of them that I can, so.
Remember that night?
I do remember that night. That was a good night.
Yeah.
I think Britney Spears was playing.
Britney Spears. I remember seeing it, I was like, what a cute email.